Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name is Adam Hanlon, and I'm joined by our Russian correspondent, Alexey Mustarovich. Hello, Alex.
Hey, Adam. Nice to see you.
Is that Moscow? Is that Moscow?
Yeah. So here in I'm not even gonna get drawn into this. Yes.
No, sorry.
What do you want to
right.
talk about today?
So today, what I thought we'd talk about is one of the questions that was posed in a Shakespearean tragedy, or more importantly, posed on the forum, which is to flip or not to flip. Whether to use flip brackets with diopters and accessory lenses or not. So, Alex, do you flip?
Yes and no. It's not a simple answer. It's generally I quite like flip diopter holders. Have you got one there to show people? I haven't got one here yet. So I think they're a good, convenient, simple system for doing things. But I don't always use them. I think the convenience of them is a very good solution. I think the downside of them, particularly if you have multiple flips on them, is that those flip things, if you're not shooting with them, they're really in the way. I mean, they're properly in the way. And even if you have two, if you have one, it's in the way a lot. You have two or three of them, they're properly in the way a lot of the time of where you might want to position your strobes, or where you might want to position a focus light, or that sort of thing. And so I'm okay with a single flip. I quite regularly dive without a single flip. And actually, my preferred method is actually just to screw the diopter on each time I need to use it. And that's typically because I often dive with three different close-up lenses on a sort of typical hardcore macro dive. And I certainly don't want a three-way flip filter. So I tend to use sort of filter holding caddies, or have places within my dive gear to store the filters when I'm using them, and then just take them off and screw them on when I need them. And that works pretty well for me a lot of the time. I might combine that with using a flip, so the one I'm going to use the most stays on a flip, and then if I want to change, I might unscrew that off. But a lot of the time, I'm pretty happy just to screw them straight onto the macro port. So I use it sometimes. I do think there are certain times you really want to use it, particularly if you've, say, got a single... Like, for example, if you're doing a black water dive and you've got a wide angle conversion lens for a macro lens on your port, and every now and again you suddenly want to shoot macro, you definitely want that on a flip. You probably want to add some buoyancy to it so that when you flip it down and flip it up, it doesn't really make the camera suddenly float or sink. And I think that's a great use of a flip. But for me, I don't think they're as essential as perhaps the people who sell them might want to make you think.
I think there's a sort of very significant move in the industry to encourage people to try and do dives where they literally go from super macro to fisheye in one dive by using a variety of accessory lenses that they drop down in front of the housing. And whilst that's obviously you go underwater and you never quite know what's going to turn up. So there is some flexibility in that approach, in that when the manta arrives at Lembe, you can get pictures of the manta, which obviously normally you'd only get pictures.
Yeah, I've been on a dive where there's been a whale shark in Lembe.
Yeah, so these things do happen. But the drawback to the approach for me will always be lighting, in that, if I'm shooting macro, arguably, even if I'm shooting super macro or macro, my lighting approach or how I position my lighting will vary, and the length of arms that I use, all those sort of things. And that makes it very hard to go from shooting fisheye to macro in one dive. It doesn't really work for me. I mean, this is my own take on it.
I think it comes down to this, if you are in underwater photography to take exceptional underwater images, you're better off optimizing all your gear to get the best possible result.
Yeah.
However, I think a lot of people, when they're getting into it, they find this whole idea of being very limited on a dive very limiting, particularly if you don't get many dives, and they want to be able to do as much as possible. And I guess part of this isn't manufacturers leading the market, but actually the market demanding of manufacturers, I want more flexibility on my dives. Yeah. And so, although we like to beat the manufacturers with a stick sometimes it is them actually saying, well, the customers are demanding this product or this solution, so we're providing it. We're not saying this is the best way to take exceptional underwater photos, but actually people want to do this and they want to do that. For me, I think the downside of loading your camera up like a Christmas tree is it makes it very inflexible to use, and you might be able to shoot more things on a dive, but chances are you'll take a load of rubbish.
Yeah, I think I think I mean, the other example, of course, is the person who is diving outside of dedicated photo trips. I mean, this exists. That people who are diving with a dive master who's taking them along from point A to point B on the reef, and they're trying to get pictures along the way, and certainly they're going to encounter a variety of creative opportunities along the way. As I say, the chance of actually managing to achieve memorable imagery is reduced because, by definition, they haven't got the time to be able to sit there and do it. But having the option of being able to go from different focal lengths and so forth will be advantageous in that circumstance.
I think to go back to the original question, flips can be very helpful, but I think particularly once they have more than one flipper, they start to get in the way of your lighting. And if the convenience of having all these flip things is affecting the quality of your images and the quality of your lighting, you should be thinking very carefully about if this is the right solution for you. I think the single one is you can usually find a place that's not in the way too much of the time. But just as a typical macro example, you can't have the flipper going down on a muck dive because it hits the sand or hits the reef. So it has to either come up or to one of the sides. The typical place you put your strobes when shooting 2-strobe macro is there. So you don't want it coming to the sides. The place where if you want to go to 1 strobe, you want to put it is on the top. So it's in the way. The obvious places to put it, it's either going to hit the sand or be in the way of the 2 strobes, be in the way of 1 strobe or be in the way of your focus light. So you maybe can find a gap in the middle, but then if you want to produce, that's the limitation of it. I think if you have one, you can probably work around it. As soon as you have 2, they're in the way too much of the time.
I think you raised a good point as well, Alex. In the classic macro shooting, one of the key techniques for controlling your background is getting the camera as low as possible. And people say, well, I have the flip drops down the front. Well, you've just meant that you can no longer get as low as possible. In fact, you're now quite proud of the seabed because you've got the adapter down underneath you, which is okay, I suppose, when the adapter's attached and you're using it. When you're not, though, it's not very convenient. There's a cautionary tale about this though, which is somewhat separate. In like Alex, I tend to just screw them on, screw them off as I need them. But on a workshop Alex and I ran in Lembe a few years ago, I had unscrewed mine, put it in the pocket, and then I was holding a snoot for somebody else. So I put my camera down in the sand in order to, and was holding the snoot. Turned around, the camera had gone. So I then swam around the group going, who's stolen my camera, thinking they played a joke on me, before I realised that in actual fact my camera had become positively buoyant because I'd removed the diopter and it then floated to the surface.
Well, that was lucky.
Yeah, fortunately I found it, but there was a great deal of panic for a short while. So bear in mind that obviously sometimes maybe attaching your diopter may be a good idea.
Well, I've actually got another reason why flips are good. That is, I was diving in the Farnes this year, and we'd done a seal dive. It was actually on the trip you organised that you didn't come on. And after the first dive, it was poor visibility, and there were no seals anywhere. And so we gave up on trying to dive with seals and just went and had a little reef dive. And I thought, I'll shoot some macro, but didn't really have proper macro kit with me. It was a seal trip. But actually, on that dive, I lost one of my diopters by failing to screw it on properly and having to try and put it in a pocket with cold hands in thick gloves. Thought I was putting it in a pocket and it must have missed and is now down there in the Farne Islands waiting for someone to discover a nice shiny diopter. So and also on a Wetpixel Lembe workshop I lost an SMC. So the downside of not using a flip more or screwing them on and off. I think I was using a flip when I lost it in Lembe, but I was screwing them on and off. Was that case? One other solution that's probably worth a quick mention is the magnetic solution, which can work very well for some people, and that is you have a ring that you basically screw onto the front of your macro port, and you have a set of rings that you screw onto different diopters, and then you simply you're able to put the close-up lenses on by using the magnets. One thing I've found with these, certainly the set I have, is as the close-up lenses, the diopters have got more and more complicated and heavier, they're starting to get a bit heavy for these rings and they can begin to fall off. And also if you dive in places with particularly black sand that's got a lot of metal in it, it does tend to coat all this, and then it's like crunchy when you put them together, and you have to clean them off after the dive. But that's another solution that people quite like. And again, you can have a caddy for these on your strobe arms or something if you want to, or keep them in a pocket. And that's quite quick going on and off.
someone mentioned them in the thread on the forum about flipping or not flipping, and Dave Hicks quite rightly. I commented that I wasn't sure about using magnets close to cards and cameras because of the issue of magnetic fields, but Dave Hicks pointed out actually there isn't an issue. It's a somewhat dated piece of advice, and the natural fact you can use, cards don't get affected by magnets, which was a surprise. I didn't know that. So yeah.
Okay. So that is another solution. I do think they all have a place. I have to say, I do own, although both of us are both saying we're not the biggest fans of flips, and we're pointing out the failings of them. Both of us still own flips, and I think that they're well worth using if you're, say, going in to do a super macro dive, and you want to maybe exactly what you're going to do, but maybe you think during this dive maybe I'm actually bump into something bigger, and then you go in with the flip down. It's a super macro setup, and then you run into something bigger and you flip it up. I think, though, if you're going in on a normal macro dive where you think you might find super macro and you've got all these super macro accessories on, then the flips tend to get, a bit more getting in the way. So it's a little bit more also what you're expecting. I think
one more equipment point, really, if I might, this is going back to diving equipment, is that I find BCD pockets almost impossible to access, particularly when I've got gloves and dry suits and things on. So what I've done is I've made sure that all my suits, including my wetsuits now, have pockets on the legs. And that makes a huge difference because I can now put stuff in and out the pockets. So being able to unscrew a diopter and securely put in a leg pocket, I can feel what I'm doing. It makes it much, much easier to stow stuff away. The only thing you have to make sure is you don't just drop the dots because they bang into each other and scratch each other. So some kind of neoprene bag or something like that to protect them from each other is important, or the pocket context is important as well. But good pockets are actually a crucial part of not using flips. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I don't know which is more expensive though. Getting a pair of shorts or a pair with pockets in, or whether a flip diopter is more expensive.
Yeah, good question. I don't know. Probably not much in it, I would imagine. Perfect. Thank you, Alex. So Alex's super macro imagery shot with diopters and sometimes with flips. Where can we see it?
All over my website, amustard.com, or on Instagram at alexmustard1.
That's perfect. Thank you, Alex. I'd like to thank you all for watching. I'd like to thank Inon or Einon, if we're in the other side of the ocean, for sponsoring this episode. Please feel free to add your comments about using flips, either in the comment section below or on the forum. In the forum thread, it's an active forum thread. It's very good at the moment. And please drop us a like if you enjoyed this. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.